Hi
Hi
everyone,
everyone.
and we have another Anima Animus video for you today in our series, and we're joined today by some of our best students who are really keen to get involved in this and to get active in the world through their professional practice. But this one is an unusual one, and this has to do with how the anima can destroy a man. Now obviously Carl Jung's written about this extensively, as have his followers, but there's a certain aspect of it which is very pertinent in the present zeitgeist. It has to do with what happens when a man withdraws from relating on the outside and overvalues the image, the imago of the inner woman. How seductive and dangerous that can be, both by withdrawing him from life, by increasing the level of fantasy within himself, and therefore of dissociation in an uncontrolled way, and then the reaction that comes from women on the outside. All of this within the context of the present zeitgeist. Right, so let's get this first card up and have a look. Right, so what we have here then is a take on the myth of Narcissus. But instead of being beguiled by his own reflection, that is to say, of his persona or of his ego, what we have is a man who's beguiled by the image of the inner feminine. Now, this is a mythopoetic representation. So there's a lot more within it embedded informationally in a superposition way than appears to be there. But at the superficial level, what we can see is that behind the young man who's rather beguiled with the image of his anima in Jungian terms, the inner feminine and the relating function, we have on the outside a real woman, a physical woman who is overlooking this young man as he stirs into himself and is no longer relating to her, and not even making any real effort to relate to the outer feminine. Of course, everyone will know that, who's followed Jung anyway, will know that when the anima is constellated in a man, it tends to constellate the animus in a woman. And if there's a narcissistic interest in the man, then that will bring about a compensatory narcissism in the woman. If the man is focused with his narcissistic reflection of the inner woman on the inside, then you'll find that the animus in the woman is active on the outside. And the withdrawal of the man will draw the woman towards him in a destructive way. Now, there are reasons for this that are less obvious in some regards if we take a mythic angle on things that are more Paleolithic, more Stone Age, more evolutionary. But the mythic scene is important because that sums a lot of things up. The character of the knight with the drawn sword, that is meant to symbolize the animus of the woman in an aggressive form. And that will become weaponized and aimed directly at the man. And in effect, then, he can expect to be beheaded. Now, I don't mean that literally. There are lots of ways of beheading a man. It includes neutering him, includes destroying his reputation, includes damaging all of his external relationships. It includes constellating something that gets interpreted by Jungians as being the inner man inside the woman, but with a form of aggression which is literally cutting, and Jung himself does talk about that. If this young man is metaphorically beheaded here, then what will happen, of course, is that his head will fall into the image of the inner woman, and that will really be an amplification of his existing fascination with this image that he's discovered inside himself. But the decapitation will essentially mean that he will be disconnected from his body, disconnected from his instincts, and will in effect drown within the unconscious, as the Jungians understand that to be. So this is a scenario which is met by ourselves in our clinical practice so frequently these days that it's something we should talk about in some depth. because Jungians promote introspection and reflection on the inside. They promote the idea of the anima being an inner woman and being the persona of the unconscious, that kind of thing. But when you put that into a context of wokeism, then you find that any reasonable boundary to Jung's original model gets overextended. So the psychological idea of having an inner feminine then becomes far more literal, far more grounded. And because the man has withdrawn from the woman, the outer woman, and that's constellated her animus, then what you're likely to get then is a scenario where wokeism takes the error that is latent within a lot of Jungian ideas, amplifies and distorts them even more, causing an even wider separation and relating between men and women. This is manifestly going on at the moment in the culture. So even a withdrawal into hypermasculinity on the outside, but an inner fascination with the idea of the anima, or even the woke idea of gender fluidity, that kind of thing, all of that can withdraw a man away from his body, away from his instincts, and into a fantasy space which brings about essentially his removal from psychosocial relationships, his removal from the gene pool for reproduction, that kind of thing. So that's the representation in the image, but I've dropped a few hints there about the real cause of why the animus in the woman responds in this way when a man withdraws into himself on the inside and becomes fascinated with these inner images. And years ago, decades ago, this was not common, was it, to this extent?
No. Well, it's tolerated or supported by the culture. This is part of the problem, that these more nuanced dynamics are considered to be normal.
Yeah.
Therefore, they are supported. But on your point about the symbolic decapitation of the man and the man's anima as represented, by the image in the water, the decapitation and the blending with the imago, the image in the water, and therefore whatever it is that represents being somaticized, essentially, is what we see in the consulting room. When young men are in that state, they tend to turn up with psychosomatic transductions. That's what literally walks in. So the more mythological, the more metaphorical stuff, of course, it's still there, superpositioned with it, but it's not what walks in. What tends to walk in are the psychosomatic transductions. And then eventually, over time, if you're working with someone like that, then you gradually get a greater understanding of just how that young man has come to that point. And there will usually be something in his background to do with this fascination, this being beguiled on the inside by we would say his relating function, obviously Jung would say his anima. And you really do see that cut off, because there's a lack of relating to the body as well as to everything else, as well as to outer women and other aspects of his life. So I think it's useful to remember that the point at which the head falls into the water, it is as if literally what that represents has then gone down into the body and is now represented in the body in a different state.
Yeah, so basically the decapitated man in that mythic sense of the superposition field of symptoms that emerge has lost his cognition.
Yes.
And by cognition, in a Jungian sense, of course, we mean both the thinking and feeling functions as Jung understood. He's lost that capacity to relate to his body, but his body superpositions the wound, superpositions the loss.
Yeah.
And that's on the inside. But of course, we know what is within, so too is without. So the wound that he has on the inside then affects his behavior externally. And a wounded animal in a competitive environment, in a Darwinian sense, signals and invites attack.
Oh, yeah.
So if the separation from a woman or women collectively has already occurred at this point, and that's what's led to the sword stroke that's brought about the metaphoric decapitation, then women will see the wounded man who is not living up to her anticipation of the masculine. And it's that not living up, which in this specific case causes the animus to adopt the armor of the knight and the sword in service of the woman. So the animus, if you like, then does take on a compensatory masculine form in an exaggerated way. But the animus as such, which we can discuss, is not masculine psychology. This is a feminine response that was laid down in the Paleolithic. Men who were not competitive then would have been a burden on the tribe or the group or the family. Men who would not compete for resources, who would not fight predators or other tribes or groups, should be, from a Paleolithic perspective, removed from the gene pool, removed from the reproductive pool, removed from having status, because they get in the way, they take up resources. And one of the ways of ensuring this is for women to develop a repulsion towards a man who is withdrawn from the world in that way. And evolution has provided the mechanism then for representations to present within their psyche, within their consciousness, that is a better form of a man than a man actually is, and then attack him on that basis to further drag him down. You can see it in other animals. For example, in prides of lions, the dominant lion amongst the females, when that lion gets too old, can't compete, is sick or is injured, occasionally the lionesses within the pride will turn on and kill the dominant male. There's some horrific videos of this on YouTube where you can even see them biting off the genitals of the formerly dominant alpha lion within the pride, because he's now in the way and he needs to be replaced. Now, I'm saying that in such a way that you can see then how that carries over in a superposition way into how women will respond to what they perceive to be a weak man. And a weak man will be one who is more entranced by the inner image of what is projected onto women, but is really a part of the male psyche, has little to do with how women really are. That is a kind of a self-deletion, which the collective psyche of women and the individual psyche of women will often recognize. They will then armor up and project their animus in attack mode against the man who is withdrawn.
They were literally going for the kill. I mean, that's what you're saying in effect, isn't it? It is that primal. And it doesn't matter how independent women think they are or believe they are or feel they are. When those instincts come online, they come online in that way. And when they mobilize, they mobilize in the most vicious ways imaginable. And of course, as you say, we're talking about this metaphorically here. But the result is the same in so much it is literally to do with the takedown of the man. And it can be absolutely merciless when that happens. And the degree to which that woman or a group of women are aware of that varies according to the individual women involved. But there will be an element of them not being able to help themselves. We were talking with someone about this yesterday, that when that response is mobilized, it's so primal that it's not that it's impossible to stop it. It's just that it comes through with such force that it makes it very difficult to. And you see it in relationships all the time. You see it when couples argue, and they argue ferociously. You know that they're arguing from an instinctive level. It's coming from Paleolithic instinct. And Jung used the term, the archetypes are warring. Well, it's like, well, what does that even mean? But when you think of it in that way, when you put it into a Paleolithic context, you can see it, and you can see why. Because women are very, both individually and collectively, resource focused. They need to feel secure. They need to feel that the man or the men that they're relating to will take care of them. And that's something that they won't want to hear, particularly in this woke culture. But their instincts will want to hear that, will want to know it. That men, when it's required of men, that they will step up and they will provide for them in that way, because, you know, women are a biological resource. They are the ones, as far as I'm aware, that have the children. And so there will be that deep, primitive, primal, Paleolithic, whatever you want to call it, expectation that that is what men will do, no matter how liberated they believe that they are. That will still be there. It's so highly conserved.
And that's a paradox, isn't it?
Yes, it
Which will thrive where there is unconsciousness of the primacy of adaptive instincts that perseverates in a highly conserved way from the Paleolithic into the present. And where there is no consciousness of that as such, then women are simply moved with respect to their ego at an individual level and at a collective level. And for men, it's like, what's going on here? These women are nothing like this image in the water that I'm looking at, that I'm so fascinated by, that I'm told there's an inner woman within me, a man. And it's not, because your anima is not any woman. It's the capacity to relate to them and to find them of value enough to reproduce with, to spend your life with, potentially, to die for, either individually or in service of the tribe or the group. And as well as that, ultimately, potentially, a platonic level, positive Jungian relationship that increases consciousness.
And if the young man is configured in that way, the fall, the collapse, whatever you want to call it, is all the greater.
It's all the greater,
if they then suffer that kind of blow to their masculinity, and that it's just... that brings about unimaginable suffering.
It does. So there's all sorts of ways of understanding this, and they are all the same, but they are different. They're all the same in the sense that once we draw back and see the whole field where each element is interactive and relies upon the others, then we can make sense of what we're experiencing. If we don't do that, if we fractionalize, if we drop into Jung, we will miss all the reality, the external adaptive reality that is playing through it. If we only focus on the external adaptive reality, then we are locked in a Darwinian battle, which dehumanizes our consciousness and our aspirations to grow. So we need the Jungian side, but they have to be complementary to one another. And the beginning of that is to understand that the anima is not a woman. It's an impression of women that allows men to relate to them positively. That's the anima as the relating field, that is to say, the function and the system, collapse into the construct of the anima. It's very narrow bandwidth, actually. But if we take the anima to be an aspect of wider relating, that's liberating, because then we can say, there's more to this than this image that I'm hypnotizing myself with. And I can start to integrate aspects of my instinctive masculinity. So it's not opposed to the inner image. The inner image doesn't blanch it out and conceal it. It relates to it. At that point, the man can put the armor of the knight on himself and have his own sword, and then function externally in the world, physically, but through a set of values and ideals that will appeal deeply to the conserved psyche within the collective feminine. Here's somebody who is hard when he needs to be, who has insight, who has high moral values, can achieve things in the world, and ultimately won't be messed around with.
And any woman who is orientated towards the platonic masculine will be very grateful for that, because it's such a complete representation.
And if we deny it, we hand that over to the compensatory shadow of our own masculinity, which we are suppressing by being entranced on the inside. That constellates the reactive negative animus in women, and men are stunned by that and say, look at the difference between all of these women and this image on the inside, so they withdraw even more. And then you have internet gurus who like you to do that because you become dependent upon them. It's a form of attachment to solve this problem by repetition compulsion, more and more of the same nonsense and attachment to them and their maladaptations. With internet gurus, always look into their background, and if they're proposing some kind of adaptation, ask the question, have they achieved this? There are a number of very famous internet gurus who go on about Jungian stuff, and you can see that their life is an absolute mess. They failed completely. That's one of the strategies, it seems, whereby people who are maladapted find an audience and dilute their problem by projection into the audience that they attract to them. So then the audience have the problem and they don't, because they project it and dilute it. That reduces their own internal pressure. But you can still see that they're suffering in that way. They are very severely divided and don't relate properly, for example. So when we allow people to influence us, whatever they make a claim about, they have to be able to stand the pressure of being analysed over that. That's how you protect yourself against maladictive suggestion from people who sound wave and use mirrors and all the rest of it to deflect our attention away from what's going on. And a lot of the people we work with have been through the attachment to these gurus and have been virtually destroyed by them. So that's really one of the most important things for us, because we speak from a position not of being academics, but of being frontline clinicians. And that's what our concern is. What is actually happening between people?
Well, you see the same dynamic clinically, Steve,
you
well,
do,
don't you? Yeah, you do, where you'll get a therapist or an analyst who is attached to a particular patient because it's actually very often the patient that they need, in so much as that person's configured in such a way that it represents what's wrong with them and needs to be resolved in them, but they remain attached to that person because for whatever reason they can't work themselves through. And they bind that person, they attach that person to them, and the therapy or the analysis goes on for years for that reason. Because whilst in relationship to that person in that way, they feel normalized by it. And so that attachment has to be maintained at all costs. So you again, you sit in the consulting room, but you also see it at large in the culture, in the way that you've just described with respect to gurus. But either way, it should be a, if the light comes on, if you're the patient or you're the person who's attached to the guru, and the light comes on in that way, and suddenly you see it, you see that you're actually there for them rather than the other way round, that's the time to get out.
It is. Because they don't do you any favors. They might talk about putting on your own armor and having your own sword and all the rest of it, but they don't exemplarize that. They don't do it themselves. And it's all about half explanations and attachments and that kind of thing. So be careful. It's a form of influence and suggestion which supports them in not moving forward. Now, this is scale invariant. So if we drop that down into ordinary life, and there's no gurus, there's just your friends, there's your mates, they can be like that. They can be your worst enemy when it comes to dealing with women and with dealing with the concept of the anima on the inside, because there is a competitive element there as well between men. They'll very often dial themselves down, each other, because they are failing and they can't adapt, and they want to dilute themselves within a reference group that all agree, and so there's no adaptation. And the larger the group and the larger the reference to that large group, the more widely distributed is that effect. Then at a collective level, that will just reinforce the present zeitgeist. That will make woke worse. That will make the attack on men worse. And simply becoming a caricature of the masculine, like some of these gurus suggest, won't help at all, because that will just armor up the negative animus to come for you in a way that shit tests you and seeks to break you. And that's what's happening now, and has been happening for some time, of course. So going back to the card, and just to hold that in mind, let's throw this open to the guys if anyone's got anything they'd like to ask or comment upon.
Yeah, the things you mentioned, especially about the caricatures, is so prevalent. I mean, you can see it on the internet. I mean, if there's some videos of some over the top representation of women or men, you'll see in the comments always the polar opposite of it, and the attack that goes. So even if it's men idealizing women, you will instantly, like, it will be constellated. The attack on them will be constellated, and it shows that they're at that point they're not relating to none of them are relating. But even if we're saying the men who originated with the image, they haven't been also relating to external women, and it's just idealized and caricaturized images of women, which aren't anywhere to be found, definitely. And then that just invites the attack, and it's seen on both ways. But we are talking about men here, and it can be in everyday life. I mean, you scroll a couple of videos, and you will just see the images, and the comments will be warfare. Yeah,
that's a great summary, Martin.
Yes,
great summary indeed.
Yes, I think again this is another nuance, really. I think to do with how men are represented, and how they're represented in this culture as opposed to how they've been represented in the past, for example, where the representation is, you mentioned the medieval knight, Steve, because again it's very clear cut, really, what that might represent. There's also the issue, I think, in the current zeitgeist for men, which is to do with them trying to bring their, if you like, the body back online. So they might try and compensate for being too cognitive, say, by becoming more physical. But becoming more physical might just mean, I don't know, going to the gym a few times a week, but there's no meaning attached to or associated with just performing what is in fact a set of exercises. So sometimes I think, I mean, obviously there are some who don't get that far. They're still very cognitive, and they don't really do enough physically with the body. But for those who do, I think it's important that there is some value or meaning attached to whatever that exercise represents. So we see this sometimes with people who practice martial arts of all kinds, that they will go through the forms or the katas, and in a very sort of disciplined way, but there won't be any kind of esoteric value in what they're doing, and so essentially it lacks meaning. And so I think that's something important to bear in mind as well.
I think that's absolutely true. And the complementary side to that coin is mixed martial arts devoid of culture. And so what's the best way to understand that? That's probably, again, in the hypertrophied masculinity, where fundamental displays of being masculine are brought to the fore, systematized within a culture, and then represent an attempt to block what's happening from the radicalized animus feminine.
Yes.
But there's no culture in it. And to give you an example on why I have confidence in this, not only does it feel right intuitively and clinically, but we both did, for a number of years. We were very well connected with the UFC and with world champion MMA fighters. And that had to do with a trilogy of movies that we'd written, the scripts, which were going forward really well. And there was a problem, of course, during COVID. But what drew them to it is that because it was set in Roman times, and we had pancration, the original mixed martial art, as being the focus of the gladiatorial aspects of that. And we were bringing UFC champions in as actors, both to play pancration fighters and to play other roles as well. They absolutely loved it because they felt this gave them something that was missing in mixed martial arts culture at the moment. It gave them the tradition, the heritage, and the culture. It was very, very powerful for them. And when that is absent, then we're rootless in terms of culture. We have to go back before there was culture and overemphasize hostility, aggression, and fighting in that pure sense. So if you look at a UFC match or any of the other organizations that run such things, it's like a primate expression, primate, baboon, gorilla, chimpanzee level of hostility and aggression for status and dominance. It's a very, very primitive thing. And what you hear so often from mixed martial arts people is, oh, we know what works because we test it out, and we fight it, and we know what works. Well, it shows how old that is, because what works was figured out in the Paleolithic. A piece of sharpened flint will bring down a mega beast, mega fauna, something like a woolly rhinoceros or a mammoth or a cave bear. If you can do that, you can bring down any man who has ever lived, however big they are, however experienced they are, whoever they are, with a piece of sharpened flint, perhaps on the end of a stick. And that's how it was done. That's how the primitive primate dominance hierarchy amongst paleo hominids and the immediately preceding species before we started to become human, it was dealt with that way, the invention of technology and weapons as a great leveler. And even back in the day of Greece and Rome, Alexander the Great, for example, did not take an army of pancration fighters with him on his journey to conquer the then known world. He took men with 20-foot long, 7-meter long spears. He took heavily armored hoplite knights, his silver shields. He took archers, slingers, and elite cavalry. He did not take pancration fighters. So that tells you something. Even then, when pancration was a sport within the original Olympic Games from around 500 BC onwards to about, I think it was the 300s AD, it was well known that it was something that was collapsed into itself. So it was a containing vessel, even then, within a very high civilized culture for expressing Paleolithic instincts. It's performing the same role now, but against a very powerful catabolic tide, which is driving men down into that kind of thing. And we have the internet, so we have some of these hypermasculine gurus. We have others that are primarily cognitive. Sometimes they mix together as if they're breeding in some awful way and produce a hybrid. But the outcome of that is still to persuade men that they need to overamp something, overamp the intellect, overamp the physical in compensation for what they're feeling on the inside. And then there are others who say, I have a spiritual side to me, I have another dimension to me, where can I go? And then it's Carl Jung. And Jungian ideas are great when you approach them in the right way. But if you don't, there are so many traps waiting for you on the inside. And wokeism is one of them. The idea of identity fluidity is another. And Jung walks us right into that trap when he says the anima exists because men have a minority of female genes. They do not. And then when he says that the unconscious is overwhelmingly the largest part of the human psyche, it is. But then he equates the unconscious in a man with the anima, which means that the overwhelming part of a man's psyche is feminine by implication of his ideas. And that is neutering if we follow that. We start to try to relate to these aggressive and hostile armored Amazon types, as Jungians have actually called them in the past.
Yeah. Before
woke started, they knew what was coming, but then they gave into it. These armored Amazon types who are aggressive and want to neuter us as men, we walk right into that trap. We start to give ground. We don't hold our masculinity in its proper position, because we're accused of being primitive, we're accused of being rapists, all that kind of thing, which is another echo, a perseveration of a Paleolithic fear and anticipation of what men can be like, and some men are that way.
And of course, the armoured Amazon representation comes from a man's psyche,
yes,
ultimately.
Yes, it didn't originate.
It didn't originate
with women.
No.
That's a collective male fantasy.
It is. Yeah.
That originated in Greece about the Scythians.
Yeah.
Who were unknown people. The Asian steppes retreated away from them into who knows what. So the peoples who emerged from there was something unusual about them. They were strange and different, and that generated all sorts of fantasies. That still happens. It's a highly conserved reaction. So to avoid drowning in that inner image, we have to understand that it's part of the masculine psyche and that it can be misdirected by culture. And the culture is misdirecting it. It causes us to collapse into it or to reject it. So we have to claim our armor back, our knighthood back, and we have to act in the world appropriately through our instincts, but with a spiritual side, with a transpersonal side that can deal with the world as it is. That way, then you become interesting at a different level to some of these women who otherwise will attack you. And I hate to draw another parallel, but you see it with Cesar Millan, where you see when he deals with aggressive dogs, he can turn them round in seconds. It's like a switch. They're in full-on level 10 attack mode. And then with a few minor corrections, suddenly the dog's in a different state. And it's friendly. It's reconnected with its instincts through relating to the human being within their pack, within their collective. So there's some similarity there with how we have to deal with raw instinct and compensatory instincts in particular that are coming from women towards us. We have to meet their expectations, otherwise they will take our masculinity, such as we still have it, off of us.
He does that with aggressive women as well, who produce the aggressive dogs.
That's true.
Who aren't necessarily even overtly aggressive, but they believe themselves to be the pack leader.
They do.
Or they want to be the pack leader, but they're absolutely not, because their energy isn't right to be the pack leader.
That's a good point.
And he will come back at them and simply say, which is a great put down really, he just says, everyone thinks that. In other words, everyone thinks they're the pack leader when they're not. And that's enough to deal with the animus. And its metaphorical sword that's looking to sort of like, chop everything down that comes in its way.
They call him in and then they try and defeat him.
They do,
even though it's going against their own purposes. And you'll often find with his programs that there is a subdominant male in the pack, and he might be a big guy. He might have all of those attributes that the internet gurus suggest that men should have, but the woman's controlling him, controlling the environment, his life, the relationship to the animals and children, and there's chaos. And it turns out that he may not have been masculine in the right way, as opposed to being an exaggerated way. That exaggeration can also be cognitive and intellectual. It doesn't have to be physically large and imposing in that way. But he brings about corrections, and he says, for example, I rehabilitate dogs, but I train people, which is interesting. He's not there as a dog trainer. He's there to rehabilitate the interrelationships between the species, but the fundamentals of instinct are the same. And it's now got to the state where the culture's in the mess it is, and where men are beginning the process of self-destruction by stirring in on the inside an idealized representation of the feminine they cannot find on the outside and are drawn to it on the inside. And that is reinforced by corrupted Jungian theory, both through the Jungians themselves and through woke. And that's just going to make the problem of attack worse from the women, because they are acting on instinct and they won't even know it. That's why they're doing what they're doing. They believe, like the women in the dog whisperer programs, that they know why they're doing what they're doing.
Well, he challenged a young girl the other night as well, which I've not really seen him do before.
7-year-old girl.
Was she 7?
Yeah.
But she was incredibly disruptive and just a child, of course, but none of the adults around her were challenging her behavior or putting in place any boundaries. And he did it in a very, very nice way. But nonetheless, he let the adults know around her that she was causing a huge amount of disruption, and that basically something needed to be done about that. Otherwise, things wouldn't change.
She was shouting at a pit bull.
She was,
an aggressive, biting pit bull who was nipping all of the family. And of course, he's known for handling pit bulls. And in the end, he got that girl to relate to the pit bull in a way the pit bull respected, without hurting it, but utilizing instincts to regulate the pack. But she was running around like a little Disney princess, shouting her head off at everyone. And if she grows up like that, that's what she's going to do to men. Because she did it to a pit bull. and she can do it to her father, and her mother supports it.
Yeah.
So the same dynamics are at work. When dogs get introduced into human families, they become part of the field of the human family. And where they share instincts between the canine and the human, then there's that deep identification. It's not in any kind of ego conscious register, but it draws out all the wrong kind of compensations. So where you have the men in the family who love and respect their wives, but the women don't respect the men enough in the right way, then they armor up, and then the whole thing starts to collapse. And that's a microcosm for what's happening in society.
Yeah, I think he brought 2 Rottweilers into the family when his sons were young as well, which I thought was interesting. And I have heard him mention that before, and for the reasons that you're saying, really, because it's, you know, if a very powerful breed like that can fit into a family and understand its place in the pack, that's a good way of suggesting to young guys growing up, you know, it happened to be his sons in this case, how to deal with those kinds of dynamics. And it's so simple, isn't it, really? His methods, his approach is so simple because they employ a proper understanding of instinct, and that's why he creates change in the way that he does, and as quickly as he does.
It's very, very quick.
It's very rapid.
Once instincts get recalibrated.
I mean, it's with sometimes they have the timer on the clock, don't they? And it's like it is literally just a matter of seconds in or minutes in, and already it's all been done. Yeah.
Thanks, Paul. Mladen. Oh, sorry, I thought you were coming back on something. You're okay. Okay, cool. Would anybody else like to comment? Everyone okay on that? So the solution then is to not be beguiled on the inside and then make what is within also without. So they superposition. They need not be identical to do that. You only have to have a receptive inner vessel to a corrupted representation on the outside for them then to superposition in a way which is meaningful to both at a field level, that the ego then is lost. It's lost itself. The ego's responsibility is to adapt to the outer world primarily, but receive the inner world, not to internally project its misunderstanding of the outer world. And that is typical of what can go wrong with the inner representation of what Jungians think of as being the anima. And fundamentally, that's it, isn't it? On that particular point. When that goes wrong, that's how men can destroy themselves. They constellate the thing that comes for them at an instinctive level. The archetypes, so-called, they're representatives which are downstream of much more fundamental problems, adaptive problems, who originate in our ancestry, our genetic history of our species and of related species. It's very, very deeply conserved. And if we ignore that by inflating into a pseudo-Jungian level of false spirituality, then we are going to have problems, adaptive problems.
Yeah, because otherwise we're following Jung's path again, aren't we?
Yeah.
And we all have to live in the real world. We can't be insular necessarily in the way that he was insular, or some people choose to be insular, so they might, for example, become, you know, Buddhists and withdraw from life in that way. We do have to have a connection to the real world, and it's understandable in this current zeitgeist that young men should behave in that way, because it's not very nice out there for them right now, and it encourages that kind of withdrawal.
Yeah.
But we don't see that as being a pathological withdrawal. It's an adaptive problem, because the culture is such that it's not supportive of male meta instincts, and then you see the compensatory withdrawal as a result of that. So it's not their fault as such.
No.
And we wouldn't choose to pathologize that, of course, but I mean, occasionally
it's a question of degree, isn't it? Because it's like with mental illnesses, that's normally understood. There is a point at which it crosses the event.
Threshold.
And at that
Yeah.
point, it starts to feed itself.
Yes.
and that's a maladaptive, schizoid, fantasy-based withdrawal.
Yes.
That at a minimum can rob you of your adaptations to life and lifespan development, but if it goes further than that, it can become psychotic.
Yeah.
In the sense that Jungians use the term. So it's not like frank schizophrenia or anything like that, but it's pretty close to it. It's certainly the level of a very, very severe neurosis. That's when it can go wrong. But it's something that can be corrected fairly quickly if you do the right things, which is why we brought the idea of Cesar Millan and instinct in, because he cuts through all of the cognitive issues and all the superficialities by immediately addressing instinct, and then you see how systems adjust. But when instinct isn't properly dealt with, everything after instinct goes wrong. Everything. Our cognitions, our affects, our relationships, our psychosocial and cultural representations are all downstream of instinct. So if instinct goes wrong, they all necessarily go wrong. So getting that right is the important thing. Don't stir into the pool. So the next one we're going to address is another interesting one, which will be in the following video, and that will be, is this your father's anima that's influencing you, or is it the Platonic form trying to come through? How do you know? So we look forward to that and see you again soon.
See you soon.